Richard Sterling believed the world was a stage, and he was its star performer. He didn't know that tonight the play was a tragedy, and he was merely the fool. Within 1 hour, the foundation of his carefully constructed universe, built on the shifting sands of wealth and status, would crumble into dust. The man he was about to humiliate was not just his son-in-law, he was the architect of that collapse. Liam Sterling stood in the opulent lobby of Aria, the city's most exclusive restaurant, and endured the polite yet firm dismissal of the hostess. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the very marble beneath her designer shoes belonged to him. This story is about the quiet strength that lies hidden beneath an unassuming surface, and the loud, brittle arrogance that mistakes silence for weakness. It's about the moment when the mask finally drops and the truth rearranges the world. If you believe that dignity is worth more than gold, and that true power doesn't need to shout, I think you're going to love what happens next. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to the lobby of Aria, where the storm was gathering. The air in the restaurant was a carefully curated symphony of hushed conversations, the delicate clinking of silver on porcelain, and the distant, almost subliminal sizzle from a kitchen that operated with the precision of a Swiss watch. Golden light bathed the room, spilling from fixtures that looked more like sculptures, making every patron look like they were part of a Renaissance painting. Liam had chosen this light himself, agonizing over dozens of samples with the lighting designer. He knew how it reflected off the dark, polished mahogany of the bar, and how it warmed the cool tones of the slate-gray walls. He knew this place. He knew it better than the man who had designed it, better than the chefs who created its art, better even than the woman now telling him there was simply no room. I do apologize, sir, the hostess, a young woman named Amelia, with a practiced, impersonal smile, said again. Her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of his attire. He wore dark, well-fitting jeans, a simple gray cashmere sweater, and clean, minimalist leather sneakers. It was his uniform of comfort, the clothes of a man who no longer needed to wear a suit to feel powerful. To her, however, it screamed out of place. We are fully booked for the evening. Reservations are typically made weeks, if not months, in advance. Liam nodded slowly, a calm, neutral expression on his face. He could feel the slight weight of the thin leather portfolio under his arm. Inside it rested the future of this very building. I understand, he said, his voice even and low. I was meant to be meeting my family here. The Sterling party. Amelia's fingers danced across her tablet screen. Ah, yes, a reservation for 4 at 8 o'clock. For Mr. Richard Sterling. Her tone shifted, a note of deference creeping in. She knew that name. Everyone in this city's upper echelon knew that name. They haven't arrived yet, sir. She looked from her tablet back to Liam, her brow furrowing slightly, a silent calculation happening behind her eyes. The man who booked the table was Richard Sterling, a titan of real estate. This man in the simple sweater claimed to be family. The two images didn't align in her mind. I'm his son-in-law, Liam offered, providing the missing piece of the puzzle. The puzzle piece didn't fit. It only made the picture more confusing for her. Oh, she said. The single syllable was laden with a polite, professional brand of disbelief. Her smile tightened. Well, Mr. Sterling's table will be ready for him the moment he arrives. Perhaps you'd like to wait at the bar. It was a suggestion, but it sounded like a directive. The bar was beautiful, but it was a holding pen, a place for those who waited. It was not the destination. Liam's gaze drifted past her to the main dining room. He saw the table, his favorite one, nestled in a quiet corner alcove with a panoramic view of the city's glittering skyline. Table 12. It was currently empty, a small, elegant, reserved sign standing proudly in its center. He had personally ensured that table would always have the best view when he'd overseen the final stages of the acquisition 3 months ago. The purchase of the entire restaurant group had been the culmination of a 5-year plan, a quiet diversification of his portfolio from abstract financial instruments into tangible assets. He liked owning things he could see, touch, and improve. Aria was his crown jewel. "Actually, I'd prefer to wait here," Liam said, his voice gentle but firm. He wasn't going to be shuffled off to the bar in his own establishment. It was a small thing, a tiny line in the sand, but it was his. Amelia's professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She was accustomed to immediate compliance. "Of course, sir." She gestured vaguely to a pair of stiff-backed chairs near the entrance, a clear social demotion from the plush velvet of the bar stools. Liam ignored the chairs and remained standing, his posture relaxed, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He was a portrait of patience. He could feel the low-level hum of anxiety that always preceded an encounter with his wife's family. For 3 years, he had endured their barely veiled condescension, their patronizing questions about his little job in finance, and their constant, grating reminders of how lucky he was that Chloe had married down. He had borne it all with a quiet dignity that they consistently mistook for weakness. He had never corrected their assumptions about his financial status. They saw his simple car, his modest home in a quiet, unfashionable suburb, a home he and Chloe had chosen for its peace, not its prestige, and his lack of designer labels, and they drew their own conclusions. They concluded he was a nobody, a decent, hard-working but ultimately insignificant man who had somehow managed to charm their beautiful, pedigreed daughter. Chloe, his wife. He loved her with a depth that still surprised him sometimes. But her one great failing was a crippling fear of her family's disapproval. She saw their behavior, she heard their cutting remarks, and she would wince, her eyes pleading with him to just let it go, to not make a scene. She was the silent enabler, the unwilling accomplice in his slow, weekly humiliation. Tonight, he had hoped, would be different. He had planned to tell her, and only her, his secret. He was going to take her to table 12, order a bottle of the vintage champagne he knew she loved, and hand her the folder. He was going to show her the plans for the new terrace garden he was naming after her. It was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of shared joy, a secret just for them. But then her father had called. Richard, in his booming, self-important voice, had announced he was taking them all out to celebrate a recent deal he'd closed. He had chosen the restaurant, of course, Aria. The irony was so thick Liam could almost taste it. He had tried to suggest a different night, a different place, but Richard Sterling was not a man who brooked suggestions. And Chloe, as always, had acquiesced. "It's just easier, Liam. Please, for me?" So here he was, waiting. The heavy glass doors swung open, admitting a blast of cool night air and the boisterous, confident voices of the Sterling family. Richard led the charge, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expensive suit tailored to within an inch of its life. He radiated an aura of unshakable self-importance. Behind him was his wife Eleanor, draped in pearls and a look of perpetual, mild disapproval. And trailing them was Kyle, Chloe's younger brother, a smirking, callow echo of his father. And there, at the back of the pack, was Chloe. She looked beautiful, as always, in a simple, elegant black dress. But her eyes, when they met Liam's, were already filled with apology. The night hadn't even begun, and she was already sorry. "Liam, there you are," Richard boomed, his voice filling the lobby. It wasn't a greeting, it was an accusation. "Couldn't get a table, I see. Not surprised. You have to know people to get into a place like this." He clapped a hand on Liam's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look avuncular, but felt more like an assertion of ownership. Eleanor's gaze flickered over Liam's sweater and jeans, and a tiny, almost imperceptible sneer touched her lips. "Liam, dear," she said, her voice a silken weapon. "Did you come straight from the gym? This is Aria, not a pub." Kyle snickered. "Give him a break, Mom. He probably thought smart casual meant his nicest pair of sneakers. Liam felt a familiar heat crawl up his neck, but he kept his expression serene. He looked past them, his eyes finding Chloe's. She stood frozen, her purse clutched in her hands, a pained expression on her face. She opened her mouth as if to speak, to defend him, but then her father turned, draped an arm around her, and pulled her towards the hostess stand, effectively ending the moment. She went without protest, casting one last, helpless glance back at her husband. "Richard Sterling, party of four," Richard announced to Amelia, who was now beaming with the full force of her professional deference. "My son-in-law was just keeping the spot warm for us." He winked at Liam, a cruel, dismissive little gesture that designated him as the help. Liam stood alone for a moment, the sound of his wife's family laughing and schmoozing with the hostess echoing in the suddenly vast space of the lobby. He adjusted the leather portfolio under his arm. The celebration he had planned was dead. A different kind of evening was about to begin. The quiet man had been pushed one time too many. Tonight, the stage did indeed belong to Richard Sterling, but he had profoundly misjudged his role in the play. Richard took command of the hostess stand as if it were a corporate boardroom he was about to acquire. He didn't speak to Amelia, he spoke at her, his voice resonating with the easy authority of a man who had never been told no in a place where money talked. "Good evening," he began, though the warmth in his tone didn't reach his eyes. "Richard Sterling, table for four, should be in a nice quiet corner. I spoke to a fellow named Gerald? No, Gregory, the manager. He assured me we'd be well taken care of." Amelia's smile was now fixed, a mask of pure accommodation. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. Welcome to Aria. Your table is ready. Right this way." She gestured grandly towards the main dining room, her entire posture shifting to communicate subservience and eagerness to please. She cast a brief, almost pitying glance back at Liam, who remained standing by the entrance, a silent, solitary figure. The message was clear. This is what real power looks like. As they began to follow Amelia, Eleanor paused, turning back to Liam. "Well, are you coming, Liam?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of theatrical exasperation, as if his very presence were an inconvenience she was magnanimously choosing to tolerate. "I believe the reservation was for four," Liam stated calmly. The party was Richard, Eleanor, Kyle, and Chloe. He was the fifth wheel, the uninvited, uncounted addition. Richard half turned, an amused smirk on his face. "Ah, that's right. An oversight. My mistake." The apology was hollow, a performance for the benefit of the staff. "No matter. We'll just squeeze you in. They can add a chair." He made it sound like a great favor, like he was allowing a stray to shelter from the rain. Chloe finally spoke, her voice small and tight. "Dad, I told you Liam was coming. I said we needed a table for five." "Did you, darling?" Richard said, patting her arm dismissively. "Must have slipped my mind. So much on my plate these days, closing these big deals. You understand." He turned his focus back to the business of being seated, the matter of Liam's inclusion already forgotten. They swept into the dining room, a conquering royal court, leaving Liam to trail in their wake. He watched as they were led not just to any table, but to table 12. His table. The alcove he had pictured for his quiet celebration with Chloe was now being occupied by the very people who had made such a celebration impossible. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for dramatic irony. As the maitre d' directed a busboy to fetch an extra chair, Richard surveyed the table with a satisfied air. "Excellent. A perfect view. See, this is what happens when you cultivate relationships, Kyle. You don't just get a meal, you get an experience." The extra chair arrived. It was a simple, armless wooden chair, starkly different from the plush, upholstered armchairs the others were settling into. It was placed awkwardly at the head of the table, slightly out of the main circle, a physical manifestation of Liam's status in their eyes. An afterthought. Liam walked slowly towards the table, the leather portfolio still tucked under his arm. He could feel the eyes of other diners on them, drawn by Richard's booming voice and the slight commotion of adding a seat. He felt a familiar surge of frustration, not for himself, but for Chloe. He saw the flush of embarrassment on her cheeks, the way she avoided his gaze, focusing intently on unfolding her napkin. He knew she hated this as much as he did, but her silence was a form of consent. It was a betrayal, small but sharp, and it happened every single time. He reached the table and, instead of sitting, placed the portfolio gently on the seat of the extra chair. "What's that, Liam?" Kyle asked, a mocking glint in his eye. "Brought your homework with you?" "Just some work papers," Liam replied evenly, his gaze sweeping over the family. "Always the diligent worker bee," Eleanor chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "You must work so very hard at that firm of yours. Chloe tells us you're some sort of analyst?" She said the word analyst as if it were a particularly unappetizing insect. "Something like that," Liam said. His little job involved managing a private equity fund with assets in the 10-figure range. The fund's most recent acquisition was the global hospitality group that owned Aria and its 7 sister restaurants across the world. It was a detail he had never felt the need to share. He believed a man's worth wasn't measured by his bank balance, but by his character. In the Sterling family's world, however, character was a quaint, irrelevant concept. Net worth was the only metric that mattered. Richard leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He was in his element. "Well, whatever it is you do, Liam, you must remember the importance of presentation. Look around you." He gestured expansively at the room. "These are the people who run this city. They understand that perception is reality. A man in your position should be in a suit, a good one, not that." He waved a dismissive hand at Liam's sweater. "My clothes are clean, Richard, and comfortable," Liam said, his voice quiet but carrying a new, hard edge that went unnoticed by the self-absorbed family. "Comfort is for weekends, my boy," Richard scoffed. "Success is a full-time job. You've got to dress for the job you want, not the one you have. Take my advice. It's for your own good. I want to see Chloe's husband succeed, to be someone she can be proud of." The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. As he was now, he was not someone to be proud of. Liam's eyes locked onto Chloe's. This was it. This was her moment. A direct insult not just to him, but to her choice, to their life together. He saw the conflict in her face, the flicker of anger warring with a lifetime of conditioned deference to her father. The battle was fierce but brief. Fear won. She looked down at her lap, her shoulders slumping in defeat. The silence from his wife was louder than any of Richard's insults. It was a confirmation, a validation of their judgment. In that moment, something inside Liam shifted. The patient, accommodating man who had endured years of these small cuts finally bled out. A different man began to take his place. A man who owned this room and everything in it. "You know, Richard," Liam began, his voice dangerously soft, "that's interesting advice." He picked up the wine list from the center of the table, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look at it. He just held it, feeling the weight of the thick, embossed cardstock. "But I've always found that the people who talk the most about the importance of perception are the ones who have the least reality to back it up." A stunned silence fell over the table. It was the first time Liam had ever pushed back. Richard's face, which had been florid with self-satisfaction, began to darken. Eleanor's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up towards her hairline. Kyle just looked confused, as if his brain couldn't process the input. Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a tiny, undeniable spark of admiration. The battle lines had just been drawn, and Liam, for the first time, had shown he was willing to fight. The tension at table 12 was now a palpable thing, a fifth, unwelcome guest. Richard Sterling, unaccustomed to anything less than fawning agreement, stared at his son-in-law as if seeing him for the first time. The quiet, malleable young man he had so enjoyed patronizing had just returned his serve with unexpected force. "What did you say?" Richard's voice was low, stripped of its usual bluster and replaced with a cold, menacing edge. Liam didn't flinch. He placed the wine list back on the table with surgical precision. "I said," he repeated, his voice maintaining its calm, almost conversational tone, "that a preoccupation with appearances often suggests a lack of substance." He let the sentence hang in the air, a direct challenge to Richard's entire worldview. Before Richard could formulate a response, Eleanor intervened, her voice like ice. "That is an incredibly rude and ungrateful thing to say, Liam. My husband is offering you the benefit of his experience, and you throw it back in his face. You should be ashamed." "Ashamed?" Liam tilted his head slightly, a gesture of genuine curiosity. "Why? For suggesting that a man's character is more important than his clothes?"
I would have thought that was a virtue.
He was using their own language of polite, theatrical morality against them. He was building a mirror, and he was about to force them to look into it. Kyle, sensing his father's fury and his mother's indignation, jumped in with his usual clumsy attempt at wit. "Whoa, deep thoughts from the guy in the cheap seats. Did you read that in a fortune cookie, Liam?" Liam's gaze shifted to Kyle. He didn't say a word. He simply held his brother-in-law's gaze, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched. Kyle's smirk began to falter under the weight of that unwavering stare. He fidgeted in his seat, looking to his father for support, but Richard was still locked in his own silent battle with Liam. Kyle cleared his throat and looked away first, taking a sudden, intense interest in the water glass in front of him. A small victory, but a significant one. The pack dynamic was being tested. It was at that moment that the sommelier arrived, a tall, elegant man named Jean-Pierre, whose presence Liam had specifically requested when he'd set up the original, now aborted, reservation. Jean-Pierre, however, was now responding to the summons of the new manager, who had been alerted by Amelia that the important Mr. Sterling had arrived. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," Jean-Pierre said, his voice a smooth, cultured purr. His eyes, however, flickered for a nanosecond to Liam, a hint of confusion in them. He recognized Liam, not as a patron, but from the all-hands introductory meeting 2 months prior, where the new, unseen owner had been introduced via a video conference call. Liam had kept his camera off, his presence only a name on a screen. L. Carter, his middle name. But his voice, calm and measured, as he'd laid out his vision for the restaurant group, was unmistakable. Richard, oblivious, swelled with renewed importance. The arrival of the sommelier was a return to the familiar script. "Ah, Jean-Pierre, excellent. We'll have the Montrachet to start. The 2005, if you have it." He said it with the casual air of a man ordering a Coke, a clear performance of wealth. Jean-Pierre's professional poise was flawless. "An excellent choice, sir. A truly magnificent vintage." His eyes met Liam's again, and this time the confusion was mingled with a dawning, incredulous realization. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of deference so subtle that only Liam, who was looking for it, could have caught it. It was a silent acknowledgement. "I know who you are." Liam gave an equally subtle shake of his head, a silent command. "Not yet. Play along." The sommelier understood. He turned back to Richard. "Right away, sir.
And for your main courses?
We'll decide later." Richard waved a hand dismissively. "Just bring the wine." As Jean-Pierre retreated, Richard's confidence returned, buoyed by the familiar ritual of command and obedience. He turned his attention back to Liam, his expression one of a disappointed headmaster. "Now, as I was saying before you so rudely interrupted, Liam, you are part of this family now. Your image reflects on us, on Chloe." He placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "I know you want what's best for her, And what's best for her is a husband who commands respect. A man who walks into a room and people take notice. Some people command respect, Richard, Liam said, his voice still quiet. And some people demand attention. They're not the same thing. Chloe drew a sharp breath. She looked from her father's reddening face to her husband's calm, resolute one. She was standing on a fault line, and the ground was beginning to shake. "Dad, Liam, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. Let's have a nice dinner." "A nice dinner is exactly what I'm trying to have." Richard's voice was rising, drawing more attention from the surrounding tables. Patrons were beginning to stare more openly now. "But it's difficult when your son-in-law seems determined to insult you at every turn." This was the moment Liam had been waiting for. The escalation. He had pushed, and Richard, with his monumental ego and lack of self-control, had pushed back harder, escalating the conflict from a private family disagreement into a public spectacle. He was playing Richard's own game, but with a level of strategy Richard couldn't even comprehend. "I have no intention of insulting you, Richard," Liam said, and the terrifying thing was, it sounded like he meant it. "I'm simply having a conversation. You shared your perspective on success. I'm sharing mine." He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table. "My perspective is that true success is invisible. It's the freedom to wear what you want, live where you want, and spend your time with people you value, not people you need to impress." He let his eyes drift from Richard to Eleanor, then to Kyle, and finally they rested on Chloe. "It's about having a partner who defends you, who stands with you, not because you are powerful or wealthy, but because you are her husband." The words were a direct hit, and he saw Chloe flinch as if struck. He felt a pang of regret, but it was necessary. She needed to understand the cost of her silence. The atmosphere was now thick with unspoken accusations. The wine, when it arrived, felt less like a celebration and more like a ceasefire. But the truce was fragile, and everyone at the table knew it. The quiet man was no longer quiet. He had a voice, and he was finally using it. And the Sterling family was beginning to realize, with a growing sense of dread, that they did not like what he had to say. The arrival of the 2005 Montrachet should have reset the mood. It was a legendary wine, a bottle that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Its presentation was a ritual in itself. Jean-Pierre handled the bottle with the reverence of a priest handling a holy relic. The cork was drawn with a soft sigh, a sample poured for Richard's approval. It was all part of the theater of fine dining, a performance designed to reinforce the patron's sense of importance. Richard swirled the pale gold liquid in his glass, sniffed it with an exaggerated air of expertise, and took a small sip. "Acceptable," he pronounced, a king granting his favor. Jean-Pierre proceeded to pour for the table, his movements economical and graceful. When he reached Liam, who still hadn't taken his seat, he paused. "Sir?" Jean-Pierre's expression was a perfect blank slate, but his eyes conveyed the question. Liam simply shook his head. "None for me, thank you." Richard seized on this immediately. "What, is the wine not good enough for you now? Or can you just not appreciate the finer things?" "I appreciate them just fine," Liam said calmly. "I'm just not drinking tonight. I prefer to keep a clear head." He looked directly at Richard. "I have some business to attend to." "Business?" Eleanor scoffed into her glass. "At this hour? What kind of business gets done on a Saturday night?" "The important kind," Liam replied, leaving the statement hanging, ambiguous and vaguely threatening. He remained standing, a silent sentinel by the awkward, empty chair. His refusal to sit, to join their circle, was a powerful statement. He was no longer trying to fit in. He was setting himself apart. Chloe took a nervous sip of her wine. "Liam, please," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Please just sit down. You're making a scene." "Am I?" Liam asked, his voice genuinely soft as he spoke to her. "Or am I simply refusing to be invisible anymore?" He saw the tears welling in her eyes, and it took all of his resolve not to comfort her. This was a lesson she had to learn on her own. Her comfort had always come at the price of his dignity, and he was no longer willing to pay it. Richard, emboldened by the wine and his wife's support, decided it was time to end this little rebellion. He saw Liam not as a man with a grievance, but as a misbehaving child who needed to be put in his place. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, monogrammed leather wallet. He extracted a crisp $100 bill and held it out. "Here," he said, his voice laced with a final, crushing condescension. "It's clear you're not comfortable here, Liam, and frankly, your mood is spoiling the evening. Why don't you take this, go find a place where you'll feel more at home, and get yourself a decent meal. On me." The entire restaurant seemed to fall silent at that moment. The gesture was so openly, so brutally insulting that it sucked the air from their corner of the room. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a character assassination. He was treating his daughter's husband like a panhandler, a piece of human refuse to be paid off and sent away. Eleanor gave a small, approving nod. Kyle smirked, clearly impressed by his father's power move. Chloe stared at the $100 bill in her father's hand, then at her husband's face. Her own face was a mask of pure horror. This was it. The line had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. This was an act of such profound disrespect that it could not be ignored or smoothed over. Liam looked at the money. He looked at Richard's smug, triumphant face. He looked at Eleanor's cold satisfaction and Kyle's jeering smile. And finally, he looked at his wife, whose silent tears were now streaming down her cheeks. He felt a strange, unnerving calm settle over him. The anger, the frustration, it all evaporated, replaced by a crystalline, absolute clarity. The years of quiet endurance were over. The slow burn had reached its flashpoint. This was the moment of ignition. He did not raise his voice. He did not move. He simply stood there, letting the humiliation hang in the air, letting the other patrons see it, letting his family steep in the poison of their own creation. The quiet before the storm. He let the silence stretch, becoming heavier and more uncomfortable with each passing second. Richard's hand, holding the money, remained extended, starting to look foolish, desperate. Slowly, deliberately, Liam reached out, not for the money, but for the leather portfolio that was resting on the empty chair. He picked it up and held it in both hands, his fingers tracing the worn grain of the leather. It was his symbolic object, the physical representation of the hidden power he was about to unleash. "Thank you for the offer, Richard," he said, and his voice was so devoid of emotion, it was chilling. It was the voice of a judge about to pass sentence. "But I don't think I'll be needing that." He took a step closer to the table, placing the portfolio gently in the center, next to the ridiculously expensive bottle of wine. "In fact," he continued, his eyes locking onto Richard's, "I think it is you who is about to find himself in need of a little charity." The statement was so audacious, so utterly at odds with the reality they perceived, that for a moment they could only stare. Richard actually let out a short, barking laugh, a sound of pure disbelief. It was the last time Richard Sterling would laugh that night. From the corner of his eye, Liam saw a figure approaching their table. It was a man in a sharp, dark suit, his bearing confident and his expression concerned. It was David Chen, the longtime general manager of Arya, the man Liam had personally promoted to director of operations for the entire restaurant group. David was supposed to be on a flight to Milan, but there he was. The unexpected ally had arrived, right on cue. "Everything all right here, Mr. Sterling?" David asked, his address directed at Richard, but his eyes were on Liam. There was a question in them, a silent offer of support. Richard, seeing the man he perceived as the highest authority in the room, felt a surge of validation. "David, just the man. We're having a slight family issue. My son-in-law was just leaving." Liam smiled, a real smile this time. It didn't reach his eyes. "I don't think so," he said softly. He looked at David. David, glad you could make it. I trust your flight was canceled? David's professional mask slipped, replaced by a look of genuine deference. Mr.
Carter, he said,
The name dropping into the conversation like a stone into a still pond. Yes, a last-minute change of plans. I received a message from Amelia that concerned me. I thought it best to come in. The Sterling family froze. Mr. Carter? Who was Mr. Carter? Their heads swiveled from David to Liam, the gears of their understanding grinding to a halt. Liam tapped the leather portfolio. I think it's time we had that meeting. The name Mr. Carter hung in the air, meaningless to the Sterlings, but a thunderclap to the staff. Amelia, the hostess, who had been hovering nervously near the entrance of the dining room, went pale. Jean-Pierre, the sommelier, who was discreetly observing from the service station, straightened his spine. They knew that name. L. Carter was the phantom owner, the mysterious figure who had purchased the entire restaurant group. Richard, however, was still trapped in his own reality. He saw this as a pathetic attempt by Liam to save face, perhaps by name-dropping a business acquaintance. Carter? He barked, a dismissive laugh in his voice. Who's Carter? Another one of your imaginary friends, Liam? David, I apologize for my son-in-law's behavior. He's having some sort of episode. David Chen did not look at Richard. His full attention was on Liam, his posture one of respectful attentiveness. Sir, he said, his voice clear and formal, your instructions? The use of the word sir was a cannon shot. It was directed not at the titan of real estate, Richard Sterling, but at the man in the cashmere sweater. Liam gave David a small nod. Thank you for coming in, David. Let's start with the new manager. What's his name? Gregory, I believe? Yes, sir. Gregory O'Brien. Hired 6 weeks ago, David confirmed. Ask him to join us, please, Liam said, and bring a copy of his performance contract. I believe there's a probationary clause we may need to review. The blood drained from Richard's face. Eleanor's hand, holding her wine glass, began to tremble. Kyle's jaw was slack, his mocking expression replaced by one of utter bewilderment. Only Chloe seemed to understand, her tear-filled eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying comprehension. She was looking at her husband as if she had never seen him before, because she hadn't. David spoke quietly into the small microphone on his lapel. Within 30 seconds, a portly man in a slightly too tight suit hurried towards their table, his face slick with sweat. This was Gregory O'Brien, the new manager, the man Richard had cultivated a relationship with. David? Mr. Sterling? Gregory said, his eyes darting nervously between the two men. Is there a problem? Liam answered before anyone else could. Gregory, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. My name is Liam Carter. Carter is my mother's name. I use it for some of my business holdings. He paused, letting the information sink in. He opened the leather portfolio on the table. Inside the top document was the final deed of sale for the SCC Hospitality Group, the parent company of Aria. His name, Liam Carter Sterling, was clearly visible on the signature line. He didn't show it to them yet. He didn't need to. The shift in the room's power dynamic was already absolute. You were hired to manage this restaurant, Gregory, Liam continued, his voice as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. Your primary responsibility is to ensure every guest feels welcomed and respected. Your second is to protect the integrity and reputation of this establishment. In the last hour, you have failed spectacularly on both counts. Gregory stammered, I don't understand, sir. Mr. Sterling is one of our most valued clients. Mr. Richard Sterling, Liam corrected him, is a guest, just like any other. And my family, he let his gaze sweep over the horrified faces of the Sterlings, was just another party. But you and your staff chose to make assumptions based on a name and a suit. You allowed a guest to be humiliated in your lobby. You allowed his family to treat him with open contempt at one of your premier tables. You did not intervene. You did not uphold the standards of this house. Instead, you enabled it. Liam looked at David. David, what is the standard protocol for a guest causing a disturbance or insulting another guest? David replied without hesitation. They are to be given one warning, sir. If the behavior continues, they are to be respectfully asked to settle their bill and leave. And was that protocol followed here tonight? Liam asked. No, sir, it was not. Liam's gaze returned to the terrified manager. Gregory, your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. David will see you to your office to collect your personal effects. You will be paid through the end of the month. That is more generous than you deserve. Gregory O'Brien looked as though he had been physically struck. He opened his mouth to protest, but David placed a firm hand on his shoulder. This way, Gregory, he said, his voice low and final. He guided the now former manager away from the table, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The entire dining room was now watching the drama unfold at table 12. The hushed conversations had ceased. All that could be heard was the faint sound of music from the speakers and the frantic beating of 4 hearts at the corner table. Liam finally sat down, not in the awkward extra chair, but in the one Richard had vacated, the patriarch's seat. He had risen slightly when Gregory arrived and now claimed the seat of power. He picked up the wine glass filled with the ludicrously expensive Montrachet, swirled it once, and took a sip. It's a little acidic, don't you think? He said conversationally to the empty air. Then his eyes, cold and clear, fell upon his father-in-law. Richard Sterling was a statue carved from fear. His face was ashen, his mouth slightly agape. The $100 bill he had offered Liam lay forgotten on the tablecloth, a pathetic monument to his hubris. You own this place? Richard whispered, the words barely audible. I do, Liam said simply. I own this place. I own the building it's in. I own the company that holds the lease on the land beneath the building. I own the vineyard that produced this mediocre wine. Any more questions about my little job, Richard? Eleanor made a small, wounded sound, like a dying animal. Kyle looked like he was going to be sick. Liam wasn't finished. The chess match was over. This was the part where the king was tipped over. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intense, personal whisper that was for their ears alone. For 3 years, I have sat at your dinner table and listened. I listened as you mocked my profession. I listened as you belittled my home. I listened as you questioned my ability to provide for your daughter. I have endured your condescension, your arrogance, and your breathtaking rudeness, all out of respect for my wife. He turned his head slowly to look at Chloe, who was sobbing quietly now, her face buried in her hands. But tonight, he said, his voice hardening again as he looked back at Richard, tonight you did it in public. You tried to humiliate me in my own restaurant. You offered me charity. You tried to cast me out like a dog. He picked up the $100 bill from the table. He held it between his thumb and forefinger. You seem to believe that this, he said, waving the bill, is what gives a man value. You believe these clothes, this watch, this address, this is what makes a man. You are a fool, Richard, a shallow, arrogant fool, and you have raised your children in your own image. He looked at Kyle. You've learned his arrogance, but none of his cunning. He looked at Eleanor. You've learned his snobbery, but none of his ambition. His eyes finally settled back on the broken man in front of him. And you, Richard, you've spent so long building a facade of power that you've forgotten what real strength is. Real strength is patience. It's dignity. It's knowing who you are when no one is watching. He let the $100 bill drop from his fingers. It fluttered down to the table. Your reservation, he said, his voice flat and final, is canceled. The power inversion was complete. It was absolute. Richard Sterling, the man who commanded rooms and bent people to his will, was now a supplicant. His face, once a mask of arrogant certainty, had crumpled into a portrait of disbelief and dawning terror. The world he knew, A world governed by wealth, status, and the fear he inspired in others, had just been turned upside down by the one man he had never even considered a player on the board. "Liam, son, please," Richard stammered, the word son sounding alien and desperate on his lips. "There's been a misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding. It was a joke. A poor joke in bad taste, that's all." Liam's expression remained unchanged. It was the calm, implacable face of justice. "A joke?" he repeated, the word dripping with scorn. "You think humiliating a man in front of his wife is a joke? You think offering him money to make him go away is a joke? For 3 years, your life has been one long, cruel joke at my expense." "I'm not laughing, Richard." Eleanor, seeing her husband falter, tried a different tactic. She marshaled the remnants of her social grace, attempting to smooth over the chasm that had opened up before them. "Liam, darling," she began, her voice trembling but trying for its usual silken tone. "We had no idea. You must understand. If you had just told us—" "Told you what?" Liam cut her off, his voice sharp. "That I had money? Is that the only thing you understand? Is a man's worth to you directly proportional to his net worth? Should I have worn a balance sheet instead of a sweater? Would that have earned me your respect? Would that have stopped you from looking down your nose at me?" The questions were rhetorical, but they were also accusations, each one a perfectly aimed dart. He was using the moral mirror, forcing them to see the ugliness of their own values reflected back at them. "My respect shouldn't have to be earned by a financial disclosure, Eleanor," he continued, his voice lowering again. "It should have been given freely the day I married your daughter. The fact that it wasn't says everything about you and nothing about me." Kyle, who had been silent and pale, finally found his voice, a weak, reedy version of its usual confident tone. "Hey, come on, man, we were just busting your chops. That's what guys do." Liam turned his cold gaze on his brother-in-law. "No, Kyle, that's what bullies do. You hide behind your father's money and your mother's name, and you throw cheap shots at people you perceive as weaker than you. There is nothing manly about it. It's pathetic." Kyle shrank back in his chair as if he'd been slapped. Liam had systematically dismantled them, one by one. He had stripped away their titles, their wealth, their social standing, and shown them the hollow, rotten core beneath. Now only one piece remained on the board: Chloe. He turned to his wife. She had stopped crying and was looking at him, her face a mess of conflicting emotions: fear, shame, awe, and a glimmer of something he hadn't seen in a long time: pride. His voice, when he spoke to her, softened. All the coldness, all the anger vanished. It was just for her. "Chloe," he said gently. David had returned and was standing discreetly a few feet away, awaiting his final instructions. The entire restaurant remained a captive audience. "Our evening is ruined," Liam said to his wife. "Your family has seen to that, but the night is not over." He gestured to David. "David, would you please have my actual table prepared? The private dining room, table for 2. "Of course, Mr. Carter," David said, and moved to obey. Liam stood up. He walked around the table to where Chloe was sitting. He held out his hand. "Chloe, your father's reservation has been canceled. He and your mother and your brother will be leaving now. You have a choice. You can leave with them, or you can come with me." It was the ultimate test, a clear, unequivocal choice. There was no middle ground, no way to smooth it over or delay the decision. Her family, who represented her past, her security, her fear, or her husband, who represented her future, her love, and a strength she was only now beginning to comprehend. Richard's head snapped up. "Chloe, you can't be serious. You're not going to side with him against your own family," he pleaded, his voice cracking. Eleanor reached a trembling hand toward her daughter. "Darling, think about what you're doing. We're your family." Chloe looked at her father's desperate face. She looked at her mother's pleading eyes. For years, those looks had been enough to control her, to keep her in line, to make her prioritize their comfort above all else. But tonight, she had seen something new. She had seen her husband, the man she loved, the quiet, gentle man she had so often failed to defend, rise like a lion. She had seen him endure the ultimate humiliation and turn it into an exhibition of absolute strength, not through shouting or violence, but through quiet dignity and irrefutable truth. She saw the hand he offered her. It was steady, confident. It was the hand of the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had been hidden for so long beneath a veneer of quiet accommodation. Slowly, deliberately, Chloe raised her own hand. She ignored her mother's gasp, her father's cry of protest. She placed her hand in Liam's. "I'm going with my husband," she said, her voice shaking but clear. It was the bravest sentence she had ever spoken. Liam's fingers closed around hers. It was not a gesture of triumph, but of acceptance, of partnership. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze and helped her to her feet. He looked one last time at the three people remaining at the table, their faces a mixture of shock, fury, and despair. "David," he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority through the silent restaurant, "please present Mr. Sterling with his bill for the wine, and then kindly show him and his family the door." The walk from table 12 to the private dining room at the back of Aria was the longest 10 yards of Chloe's life. With her hand held firmly in Liam's, she felt the eyes of every patron in the restaurant on her. But for the first time, she didn't feel shame or embarrassment. She felt a strange, terrifying sense of liberation. She was walking away from the gilded cage she had lived in her entire life and towards an unknown future with a man she was only just beginning to know. Liam didn't say a word as they walked. His presence beside her was a bastion of calm in the emotional storm. He guided her through a discreet door she had never noticed before, which opened into a short, private hallway. At the end of it was a single, imposing oak door. David was already there, holding it open. "Everything is ready, Mr. Carter," David said. "The 96 Krug you asked for is chilled." "Thank you, David," Liam said warmly. "That will be all for tonight. Please, go home to your family. You've done more than enough." "It was my privilege, sir," David said with a genuine smile. He gave a slight bow and retreated, closing the hall door behind him, leaving Liam and Chloe in complete privacy. The room was breathtaking. It wasn't large, but it was perfect. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering the most spectacular, uninterrupted view of the city skyline. A single, perfectly set table for two stood in the center, a bottle of vintage champagne chilling in a silver bucket beside it. Soft, ambient music played from hidden speakers. It was an oasis of tranquility. Liam led Chloe to the table and pulled out her chair for her. She sank into it, her legs feeling weak. He took his own seat opposite her. For a long moment, they just sat in silence, the city lights twinkling below them. Finally, Chloe spoke, her voice a raw whisper. "Liam, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. He reached across the table and took her hand again. "Are you okay?" The question, so simple, so full of genuine concern after the seismic events of the evening, broke through her shock. Tears began to stream down her face again, but this time they were not tears of shame or fear. They were tears of release. "No," she sobbed. "Yes, I don't know. I am so sorry, Liam. For everything. For tonight. For all the other nights. I was a coward. I let them treat you that way. I let them hurt you." He moved from his chair to kneel beside her, taking both of her hands in his. He looked up at her, his eyes full of a deep, unwavering love. "Hey, look at me." She met his gaze. "Tonight, when it mattered most, you were not a coward. You were the bravest person I've ever seen. You made a choice. You chose us." "But I should have chosen us years ago," she cried, her guilt pouring out of her. "I should have stood up to them the very first time my father made a joke about your car. I should have walked out the first time my mother criticized our home. Maybe, he said softly, but you grew up in that house. That behavior was normal to you. It's hard to see the poison when you've been breathing it your whole life. Tonight you saw it, and you walked away. He stood up, retrieved the champagne, and expertly opened the bottle with a soft hiss. He poured 2 glasses, the golden liquid fizzing in the tall flutes. He handed one to her. Tonight was not about revenge, Chloe, he said, returning to his seat. I want you to understand that. I never wanted to humiliate them. I wanted them to stop. I wanted you to see that you deserved a husband who was respected, and I deserved a wife who would demand that respect on my behalf. He raised his glass. This was the celebration I had planned for us tonight, just you and me. At table 12, actually, before your father decided to grace us with his presence. A small, wry smile touched his lips. He reached down beside his chair and picked up the leather portfolio, which David had discreetly brought to the room. He slid it across the table to her. This is what I wanted to show you. With trembling fingers, Chloe opened the portfolio. Inside, she didn't see deeds or financial statements. She saw beautiful, intricate architectural renderings. They depicted a stunning rooftop garden filled with lush greenery, comfortable seating, and soft lighting, all overlooking the city. At the bottom of the main drawing, in elegant script, were the words, "The Chloe Terrace at Aria." She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Liam, what is this? It's the next phase of renovations for the restaurant, he explained. Aria has the best view in the city, but the roof is just wasted space. I thought we could turn it into something beautiful, a place where people could have a quiet drink, a place named for my wife. He looked at her, his expression serious and full of love. Because you, Chloe, are the most beautiful thing in my life, and I wanted to build something permanent to honor that. The sheer, overwhelming romance of the gesture, coming on the heels of the evening's brutal drama, was too much for her. She broke down completely, her sobs shaking her entire body, sobs of regret, of love, of gratitude, and of a profound, life-altering shift in her understanding of the man she had married. Liam let her cry, waiting patiently until the storm passed. He knew this was a necessary catharsis, a washing away of the old dynamics, making way for the new. When her sobs subsided to watery sniffles, he spoke again. I didn't tell you about my work, about the money, because I didn't want it to define us, he said. I fell in love with you, Chloe. Not your family name, not your father's influence, just you. And I wanted you to be in love with me, Liam Sterling, the quiet financial analyst, not Liam Carter, the phantom owner. I wanted to know that what we had was real, that it wasn't built on a foundation of wealth and status, the same things your family worships. It is real, she whispered, clutching the drawings to her chest. It's always been real. I was just too afraid to protect it. I know, he said, but you're not afraid anymore. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. And in her heart, Chloe knew it was true. The woman who had walked into Aria that night was gone. The woman sitting here now, in this beautiful, secret room, holding the plans for a garden named after her, was someone new. She was Liam's wife, and she would never be silent again. The days that followed were a study in fallout and reconstruction. The incident at Aria did not become a public scandal splashed across gossip columns. Liam had no interest in that kind of crude victory. Instead, the story spread the way real power communicates, through quiet, influential channels. A discreet word from David Chen to a well-connected concierge. A regretful mention from a patron who had witnessed the event to his golf partner, who happened to sit on a bank's board of directors with Richard Sterling. The effect was devastating. Richard's power was built on an edifice of perceived influence and unshakable confidence. The story of his public humiliation at the hands of his unassuming son-in-law, in a restaurant he didn't even realize the man owned, shattered that edifice. It made him look not like a titan, but like a fool. A loud, arrogant man who had misjudged the situation so completely that it called his entire business acumen into question. Deals that had been on the verge of closing were suddenly delayed, pending further review. Invitations to exclusive charity boards and private poker games mysteriously dried up. When Richard walked into a room, the deferential silence he was used to was replaced by a different kind of quiet, an awkward, pitying silence. He had become a caricature, a cautionary tale whispered among the city's elite. Eleanor suffered a similar, though more social death. Her friends, the wives of powerful men, were masters of passive aggression. They didn't cut her off directly, instead they killed her with kindness. "Oh, Eleanor, you poor thing," one would say over tea, her eyes shining with malicious sympathy. "It must have been just dreadful for you to have no idea your son-in-law was so significant." The implication was clear. How could you be so clueless, so out of the loop? Her status as a social arbiter was revoked. She was no longer a queen bee, she was an object of pity, which in her world was far worse than being an object of scorn. 2 weeks after the incident, a stiff, formal letter arrived at Liam and Chloe's home. It was an invitation to dinner at her parents' house. Chloe read it, her expression unreadable, and handed it to Liam. "What do you want to do?" she asked. It was the first time she had ever asked that question about her family. Before, it would have been a statement, "We have to go." Liam handed the letter back to her. "What do you want to do, Chloe? They are your parents." She looked at the letter, at the familiar, pretentious, embossed crest at the top. She remembered the years of anxiety, the constant feeling of being judged, the endless pressure to be perfect. Then she thought of the quiet strength of her husband, the feel of his hand in hers as they walked away from that table, the beautiful drawings for the terrace named in her honor. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I don't want to go. Not yet. Not until they're ready to have a real conversation. Not until they're ready to apologize to you." Liam nodded, a proud, gentle smile on his face. "Then that's our answer." Chloe wrote a polite refusal, a masterclass in cordial distance. She didn't make excuses. She simply stated that they were unavailable, but that she and Liam would be happy to host them for a conversation at their own home, when they were ready. The shift in power was explicit. The meetings would now be on their turf, on their terms. Another week passed before a reply came, this time in the form of a phone call from her father. Chloe answered, putting the call on speaker so Liam could hear. Richard's voice was a ghost of its former self. The boom was gone, replaced by a strained, thin tone. "Chloe, darling," he began, "we got your note. We would like to come over, to talk." "Is Mom coming too?" Chloe asked, her voice cool and steady. Yes, of course." "And are you coming to apologize to my husband?" she asked directly, leaving no room for evasion. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. They could hear the faint sound of Richard's breathing, the sound of a man swallowing his pride. It was a bitter pill. "Yes, Chloe," he finally said, the words sounding like they were being dragged from him. "We are." The evening they arrived was a stark contrast to the scene at Aria. There were no power plays, no grand entrances. Richard and Eleanor Sterling pulled up to their daughter's modest suburban home in Richard's gleaming Bentley, a car that now looked absurdly out of place. They looked older, diminished. Richard's suit seemed to hang on him, and Eleanor's pearls looked less like a symbol of status and more like a heavy weight around her neck. Liam and Chloe met them at the door. Liam was wearing jeans and a simple polo shirt. Chloe was in a comfortable sundress. They were in their element. They didn't entertain them in a formal living room. Instead, Chloe led them to the back patio, a simple, comfortable space overlooking their quiet, green yard. Liam served iced tea in simple glasses. The entire setting was a quiet rebuke to the Sterling's world of opulence and performance. Richard and Eleanor sat stiffly in the patio chairs, looking deeply uncomfortable. The silence stretched, thick and awkward. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. He looked not at Chloe but at Liam. His eyes, for the first time, held a flicker of something that looked like respect. It was the respect of a defeated opponent. "Liam," he began, his voice low and hoarse, I owe you an apology, a profound one. My behavior at the restaurant and for the years before was inexcusable. I misjudged you completely. I was arrogant, I was cruel, and I was wrong. I am sorry." Eleanor, following her husband's lead, added her own quiet apology. "I am sorry too, Liam. I treated you poorly. I was a snob. There's no other word for it. I am ashamed of my behavior." Liam listened, his expression neutral. He let their words hang in the air. He didn't rush to absolve them. He wanted them to sit with the weight of their admission. Chloe, however, spoke. "Thank you for saying that," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It means a lot to hear it, but the apology isn't just for Liam, it's for me too." Richard and Eleanor looked at their daughter, confused. "You have to apologize for making me feel that my choice in a husband was a disappointment," Chloe said, her voice gaining strength. "For making me feel that the man I love was not good enough. For putting me in an impossible position for years. You hurt our marriage, and you hurt me. Your apology needs to include that." This was a blow they hadn't anticipated. They had come prepared to humble themselves before Liam, the source of their current misery. They had not expected to be called to account by their own daughter. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "Oh, Chloe," she whispered, "we never meant to hurt you. We thought we were protecting you." "You weren't protecting me," Chloe said, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its firmness. "You were trying to control me. You were trying to make my life fit your expectations. And that's not love. It's ownership." The final word hung in the air, a perfect, devastating summary of their entire family dynamic. Ownership. Richard Sterling, the man who owned so much, finally understood. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and saw not an extension of himself, but a woman. A strong, resolute woman. A woman he had almost lost. He bowed his head. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are sorry, Chloe, for all of it." It wasn't a complete absolution. It wasn't a magical fix that would erase years of hurt, but it was a start. It was a foundation, cracked and damaged, upon which something new, and perhaps more honest, could be built. Liam reached out and took his wife's hand. They were a team, united, and for the first time, the Sterling family was beginning to understand what that really meant. Months melted into a year. The Chloe Terrace at Aria opened to rave reviews, becoming the city's most sought-after spot for a sunset cocktail. From its verdant, beautifully lit expanse, you could see the entire city spread out like a carpet of diamonds. Liam and Chloe often spent their evenings there, sitting at a quiet corner table, his hand resting on hers, watching the city they were, in their own quiet way, conquering together. Their relationship had been forged anew in the fires of that confrontation. The last vestiges of insecurity and silence in Chloe had been burned away, leaving behind a woman of quiet confidence and unshakable loyalty. She became Liam's fiercest defender, not that he needed one anymore. The world now knew who Liam Carter Sterling was, but she was also his partner, an active participant in his business, bringing her own sharp intelligence and aesthetic sense to the hospitality group. The relationship with her parents found a new, fragile equilibrium. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a cautious, almost tentative respect. Dinners were no longer performances. They were quiet, sometimes awkward, but always honest conversations. Richard, humbled by his near-total loss of influence, had started to listen more than he spoke. He even began asking Liam for advice, a concession that was more significant than any financial transaction. Eleanor, stripped of her social crown, began to discover a world beyond appearances. She started volunteering, finding a sense of purpose not in who she knew, but in what she did. They were changing, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. One cool autumn evening, Liam and Chloe were having dinner with her parents on the terrace. The air was crisp, and the mood was relaxed. Richard was telling a self-deprecating story about a recent business negotiation, something he never would have done in his previous life. During a lull in the conversation, Richard looked at Liam, a question in his eyes that had clearly been bothering him for a long time. "Liam," he said, "I have to ask, why? Why did you let it go on for so long? You could have shut us down years ago. Why wait?" Liam took a sip of his wine, his gaze drifting over the glittering cityscape. He thought for a moment before answering. "Because it was never about shutting you down, Richard," he said finally. "My goal was never revenge. I didn't want to destroy you. I wanted to be accepted by you, as I was." He turned his gaze from the city to his wife, a soft, loving smile on his face. "But more importantly, this was never my battle to fight. It was Chloe's." He reached out and took her hand. "I could have revealed who I was at any time. I could have bought and sold you 100 times over and made sure you knew it. But that would have been my victory, not ours. It would have been a victory of money over arrogance. I needed it to be a victory of character, of love." He looked back at Richard and Eleanor. Chloe needed to be the one to choose. She needed to find the strength in herself to draw the line. For her own sake, for the sake of our marriage. My secret, my money, that was just the tool that finally forced the choice. The strength, the decision, that was all her. I just waited for her, and she was worth waiting for. Chloe's eyes glistened, and she squeezed his hand. In that moment, her parents finally understood the full picture. They hadn't just misjudged Liam's wealth. They had profoundly underestimated his character, his patience, and the depth of his love for their daughter. He hadn't set a trap for them. He had built a stage for his wife to find her own power. The truth is, strength rarely looks the way we expect it to. It isn't always loud and aggressive. More often, it's the quiet endurance of a man who knows his own worth. It's the patience to wait for the right moment, not to strike, but to reveal the truth. And it's the wisdom to know that some victories aren't about defeating an enemy, but about empowering the person you love. Liam didn't win by proving he was rich. He won by proving that his integrity was priceless. And in doing so, he didn't just gain his family's respect. He helped his wife find her own voice, which was the greatest treasure of all. What do you think? Was Liam right to wait so long? Or would you have revealed the truth much earlier? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. And if you found this story of quiet victory as satisfying as I did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us that true worth shines brightest when it's been underestimated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.